The orphanage told me I had no relatives, so why did this dying rancher know my mother's name? That one question was the key that unlocked my entire life, but it came wrapped in a mystery I never saw coming. It's a story about land and secrets and the real meaning of inheritance. If you've ever felt like you didn't belong anywhere, then maybe you'll understand. Stick with me, and if this story finds a place in your heart, consider subscribing. We talk about the hard stuff here. The phone call came on a Tuesday. Tuesdays were gray days at the St. Jude's Home for Boys, the kind of day where the sky was the same color as the concrete in the yard and the mashed potatoes on your lunch tray. I was 3 days from my 18th birthday, which meant I was 3 days from being handed a bus ticket, a $100 bill, and a firm handshake at the door. Freedom, they called it. To me, it felt like being pushed off a cliff in the dark. I was packing the few things I owned into a worn-out duffel bag. 3 t-shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, a book someone had left behind, and a faded photograph of a woman I was told was my mother. She was smiling, a ghost in a paper frame. Mrs. Gable, the home's director, called me into her office. Her office always smelled like stale coffee and disinfectant. She sat behind her big metal desk, her face a mask of professional neutrality. "Leo," she said, not looking up from a file. "There's a call for you." A call? No one ever called me. In 17 years and 362 days, the phone in that office had never once rung for me. "Who is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She finally looked at me, her eyes clinical. "A lawyer from Montana." Montana? I'd seen it on a map once, a big, empty-looking square in the west. It was a place for cowboys and mountains, not for orphans from the city. I took the heavy black receiver she held out. The plastic was cool against my ear. "Hello?" A man's voice, deep and calm, came through the line. "Am I speaking with Leo Vance?" Vance. The name felt foreign. My name was Leo Michaels, the name they gave me. The name on all my papers. "My name is Leo Michaels," I said. There was a pause. "Is your mother's name Elara Vance?" The air left my lungs. My mother's name. No one ever used her name. To the system, she was just a line in a file. Mother, deceased. I clutched the photograph in my pocket, the corners soft from years of touch. "Yes," I managed to say, "that was her name." "My name is Arthur Gable," the lawyer said. I was the attorney for a Mr. Elias Vance. "I'm afraid I have some difficult news. Mr. Vance passed away 2 days ago." I felt nothing. I didn't know an Elias Vance. The name was a blank. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said, the words automatic, something I'd heard people say in movies. "Thank you," Mr. Gable said, his voice patient. "Leo, Mr. Vance was your maternal grandfather." The world tilted. The beige walls of the office seemed to bend. Grandfather? I had no family, no one. That's what they'd told me, over and over every time I asked. It was the foundational truth of my life. A rootless thing, that's what I was. "That's not possible," I said, my voice shaking. "I don't have any relatives," the state said. "The state records are often incomplete," Mr. Gable interrupted gently. "Elias Vance was a very private man, but he was most certainly your grandfather. And, Leo, he has named you as the sole beneficiary of his estate." Estate, another word from a movie. It meant money, houses, things people like me only dreamed of. It couldn't be real. This was a prank. A cruel joke someone was playing 3 days before my life was supposed to officially fall apart. "What? What does that mean?" "It means," the lawyer said, and I could hear the rustle of papers, "that you have inherited the Vance Creek Ranch. Approximately 2,000 acres of land, a house, livestock, and all associated assets. There are, of course, some debts and obligations to settle, but essentially it's all yours. I sank into the hard wooden chair opposite Mrs. Gable's desk. She was watching me, her expression unreadable. 2,000 acres, a house, a home. The words echoed in the empty spaces inside me. For years, my biggest dream had been a room of my own. A door I could close and lock. A place where I wasn't just another number, another temporary resident. The lawyer was still talking, explaining things about probate and travel arrangements, but his voice was a distant buzz. All I could hear was the name, Elias Vance, a grandfather, and the impossible question that was already taking root in my heart. If he knew who I was, why had he waited until he was dead to find me? Why had he left me to grow up in a place like this, believing I was completely and utterly alone? The grief of a life I never had was a sudden, crushing weight, heavier than any inheritance. The bus ride to Montana took 2 full days. 2 days of watching the world transform outside my window. The city's gray grid of concrete and steel slowly bled away, replaced by the sprawling green and gold of the Midwest, which then gave way to the vast, humbling emptiness of the plains. I was leaving the only world I'd ever known, a world of locked doors, scheduled meals, and the constant low-grade hum of institutional life. St. Jude's wasn't cruel, not really. It was just empty. A place designed to keep you alive, but not to teach you how to live. Every face was temporary, every friendship destined to be broken by a new placement or an 18th birthday. We were all just passing through, ghosts in a hallway, waiting for our time to be up. As the bus pushed west, the sky grew bigger. I'd never seen so much sky. It was overwhelming, a deep, endless blue that made me feel smaller than I already did. The other passengers were strangers, lost in their own worlds of books and music and phone calls to loved ones. I had no one to call. I just sat there, the duffel bag at my feet, the lawyer's instructions folded in my pocket. He'd wired money for the ticket and told me to get a taxi from the bus station in a town called Prairie Ridge. He would meet me there. Prairie Ridge wasn't so much a town as a suggestion of one. A single main street with a handful of brick buildings, a gas station, a diner, and a post office. The bus hissed to a stop, and I was the only one who got off. The air was different here. It was clean and sharp, smelling of dust and pine and something else, something wild. The silence was the most shocking part. After a lifetime of sirens, shouts, and the echoing clang of metal doors, the quiet felt loud. It pressed in on me. A man was leaning against a dusty pickup truck, watching me. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with a kind, weathered face and silver hair. He wore a simple suit that looked out of place against the rugged backdrop. "Leo?" he asked, his voice the same calm tone I'd heard on the phone. I nodded. "Arthur Gable," he said, extending a hand. His grip was firm. "Glad you made it safely. It's a long haul." He took my duffel bag and tossed it in the back of the truck. "The ranch is about 20 miles out of town," he said as we climbed in. Elias liked his privacy. The truck rumbled to life, and we drove out of town, leaving the handful of buildings behind in a cloud of dust. We drove past fields of hay and grazing cattle. The mountains, which had been a distant blue line on the horizon, grew larger and more detailed with every mile. They looked like jagged teeth biting at the sky. "I have a lot of questions," I said, finally breaking the silence. Mr. Gable nodded, his eyes on the winding dirt road. "I imagine you do. I'll answer what I can, but Elias, he wasn't a man for easy explanations. He left you a letter. He said it would explain things better than he ever could." A letter. The thought sent a tremor of fear and hope through me. A message from a ghost. A man who was my grandfather. A man who had known my mother. Maybe this letter held the answer to everything. Maybe it would tell me why I'd been abandoned. Or maybe it would be full of more lies, more secrets. Why didn't he ever contact me? I asked, the question raw. Why did he leave me in that place for 18 years? Mr. Gable was quiet for a long moment, navigating a particularly rough patch of road. I can't speak for his heart, Leo. I was his lawyer, and in the last few years his friend. I know he was a complicated man. He carried a lot of grief. He loved your mother very much, and he believed he was doing the right thing. He believed he was protecting you. Protecting me? The idea was absurd. From what? From having a family? From having a home? My voice was getting louder, sharper. The anger I'd been suppressing for days was starting to bubble to the surface. He didn't answer right away. He just turned the truck onto a smaller, even more overgrown road. A simple wooden archway stood at the entrance, with the words Vance Creek Ranch burned into the crossbeam. We drove under it, and the world changed again. We were in a valley, cradled by low, rolling hills. A creek, just as the name suggested, snaked through the land, its banks lined with cottonwood trees. And there, in the center of it all, was the house. It was a simple, two-story farmhouse, painted white, though the paint was peeling in long strips. A wide porch wrapped around the front. It looked tired, neglected, but it also looked solid. It looked like it had been there forever. A barn, a corral, and a few smaller outbuildings stood nearby. It was a whole world, a kingdom of dirt and wood and sky. My kingdom, apparently. Mr. Gable pulled the truck to a stop in front of the house. The engine died, and the silence rushed back in, deeper this time. He wasn't a perfect man, Leo, the lawyer said, his voice soft. But he loved this land, and he left it to you for a reason. He trusted you with it. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope and a set of old-fashioned brass keys on a ring. Here, the letter and the keys to the house. I've taken care of the immediate arrangements. The funeral was a small, private affair, as he wished. The cattle are being looked after by a neighbor for the time being. The real work, that starts now. He handed me the keys and the envelope. My hand was shaking as I took them. The keys were heavy, real. The envelope just had my name on it, Leo, written in a shaky, spidery hand. I stood there on the dirt driveway, staring at the house. My house. It was the most terrifying and beautiful thing I had ever seen. This was it. The beginning of my life, or the beginning of another, more complicated kind of abandonment. I didn't know which. I only knew that the answers were somewhere inside that silent, waiting house, and I was the only one who could find them. The front door creaked open under the turn of the heavy brass key, revealing a world preserved in dust and stillness. The air inside was cool and smelled of old wood, leather, and something faintly medicinal. Sunlight streamed through the grimy windows, illuminating dancing dust motes in thick golden shafts. The furniture was simple, sturdy, and covered in white sheets, making the room look like a gathering of ghosts. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel bare except for a thick layer of soot. This was his home, my grandfather's. I dropped my duffel bag by the door, the sound echoing in the silence. Mr. Gable had said he'd be back in a few days to go over the legal paperwork, the debts, the taxes, the messy reality of inheritance. He'd left me with a box of basic groceries and his phone number, then driven away, leaving me truly alone for the first time in my life. The quiet was no longer just an absence of noise. It felt like a presence, a living thing that was watching me. I walked through the downstairs rooms first. The living room, a kitchen with an old-fashioned stove and a porcelain sink, and a small study in the back. The study was the most personal space. A large oak desk sat facing a window that looked out over the rolling hills. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled not with novels, but with practical books on animal husbandry, crop rotation, and engine repair. This was the room of a man who worked with his hands, a man whose life was tied to the land. On the desk, next to a tarnished oil lamp, was a framed photograph, face down. My heart hammered against my ribs. With a trembling hand, I picked it up and turned it over. It was my mother. The same photograph I carried in my pocket, only this one was larger, the image clearer. She was leaning against a fence post, and the very same landscape I could see out the window stretched out behind her. Her smile was radiant, unburdened. She looked happy. She looked home. Seeing her there, in this place, made it real in a way nothing else had. She had walked these floors. She had looked out this window. A piece of her was here. I sat down in the creaking leather chair behind the desk, the one he must have sat in every day. I placed her photograph upright on the desk and then took out the letter Mr. Gable had given me. My name, Leo, in that unsteady script. My hands were slick with sweat as I carefully tore open the seal. Inside were several pages, filled with the same shaky handwriting. I took a deep breath and began to read. My dearest Leo, it started. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and a great many of my regrets have gone with me. But one regret remains, and that is you. Not for who you are, but for the life you were forced to live because of my fear. I owe you an explanation. I owe you the truth. It is a poor substitute for a lifetime of love, I know, but it is all I have left to give. My eyes burned with unshed tears. I had to stop and breathe, forcing down the lump in my throat. I continued reading. Your mother, Alara, was my whole world. After your grandmother passed, it was just the two of us against everything. She had a spirit as wild as this land, bright and beautiful and fearless. When she was 18, the same age you are now, she went to the city for a short trip. A little adventure before settling down. But the city, it has a way of swallowing people. She met a man there. He was charming, handsome, and dangerous. She fell in love, or what she thought was love. I tried to warn her, but she wouldn't listen. She was headstrong, my Alara. She came home a few months later, bruised and heartbroken, and carrying you. The man was not who he seemed. He was involved in terrible things, criminal things. When she tried to leave him, he became a monster. He told her that if she ever left, he would find her, and he would take you. He said a child was leverage. He would own her forever through you, so she ran. She came back here to the only safe place she knew. She came home to me. I had to put the letter down. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't focus on the words. A father. A dangerous man. This wasn't a story of abandonment. It was a story of escape. My entire life, I had imagined my mother as someone who hadn't wanted me, someone who had left me on a church step in the cold. The truth was so much more complicated, so much more painful. She hadn't abandoned me. She had been running for her life and for mine. I picked up the letter again. We lived in fear for a few months. Every car on the road, every unfamiliar sound, was him coming for you. Alara was terrified, but she was also the bravest person I have ever known. She loved you with a ferocity that scared even me. She would sing to you for hours, whisper plans for your future. She was going to make sure you had the world. Then, one night, he found us. My blood ran cold. I don't know how. He showed up at the door. There was a fight. He wasn't trying to talk. He was trying to take you. I did what I had to do to protect my daughter and my grandson. I am not proud of what happened that night, Leo. A man's life was ended on this land. We buried him out on the North Ridge where the pines grow thickest. There was no law, no police, just a father protecting his family. But the law has a long memory, and his associates were not the kind of people to let things go. Ilara was broken by it. Not just the fear, but the guilt. She knew his people would never stop looking for him, and by extension, for her and for you. She made the hardest decision of her life. She decided that the only way to keep you truly safe, to give you a life free from that shadow, was to disappear. She created a story. A single mother, no family, who had passed away in an accident. She gave you a new last name. She had a friend in the city, someone she trusted, help her place you in the system, making sure the records showed you were an orphan with no connections. It was the only way to sever the tie, to make you invisible to the people who might come looking. She thought she was giving you a clean slate, a chance at a normal life. It broke her heart. It broke mine to let her do it. After she left you, she couldn't stay here. The memories were too much. She drifted for years, never staying in one place for long, always looking over her shoulder. She wrote to me, but never gave an address. The last letter I received was over 10 years ago. I don't know if she is alive or dead. My greatest failure is that I lost her. I spent the rest of my life watching, waiting, making sure the past stayed buried. I kept my distance from you, Leo, because I believed that was the only way to keep you safe. To acknowledge you would have been to put a target on your back. It was a choice made from love, but it feels like a cruelty now. I hope, I pray, that you can understand. This ranch is your birthright. It is the last piece of your mother you have, but it comes with a burden. The land is in debt. I got sick a few years ago and the medical bills piled up. A development company has been making offers to buy the place. They want the water rights. The money they're offering would make you a rich man. You could sell it, take the money, and walk away from all of this, build a new life anywhere you want. No one would blame you. It might even be the safest thing to do. But your mother loved this land. It was in her blood, and it's in yours. The choice is yours, son. Walk away or stay and fight. Whatever you decide, know this. You were not abandoned. You were protected. You were loved. Always. The letter ended there. It fell from my fingers onto the desk. The room was spinning. Every pillar of my identity, every story I had told myself about who I was and where I came from, had been demolished. I wasn't an orphan. I was the grandson of a man who killed to protect his family. I was the son of a woman who had sacrificed everything to save me. I had a name, a history, a home. And I had a choice. I looked at my mother's smiling face in the photograph. She wasn't a ghost anymore. She was a warrior. I looked out the window at the vast, rugged land that stretched to the horizon. It wasn't just dirt and rock, it was a legacy. It was the place my mother was born, the place my grandfather had died. It was the place where a terrible secret was buried under the pines. Selling it felt like a betrayal. It felt like selling her memory, selling his sacrifice. But keeping it? How could I, a boy who knew nothing but city streets and group homes, possibly fight a corporation and a mountain of debt? I felt the weight of 18 years of loneliness settle on my shoulders, but for the first time it was mixed with something else. The heavy, terrifying, and beautiful burden of belonging. The days that followed were a blur of discovery and shock. I explored the house room by room, touching the objects my grandfather had left behind, trying to piece together the life of the man I never knew. His bedroom was sparse, almost monastic. A simple bed, a wooden dresser, and another window looking out at the mountains. In the top drawer of the dresser, underneath a stack of neatly folded flannel shirts, I found a small, worn, leather-bound journal. It wasn't a diary of his feelings, but a rancher's log. Decades of notes on rainfall, calving seasons, fence repairs, and market prices for beef. It was the simple, rhythmic poetry of a life lived in tune with the land. And scattered throughout, there were single lines that were not about the ranch. Alara learned to ride today. Alara brought home a stray dog. Alara left. The house is too quiet. Each one was a small crack in the stoic facade, a glimpse of the loving father beneath the hardened rancher. I spent my evenings on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was filled with the chirping of crickets, the lowing of distant cattle, and the whisper of the wind through the tall grass. I was learning the language of the place, but the peace was fragile. My grandfather's letter had given me a past, but it had also handed me a future riddled with uncertainty. The choice he'd laid out for me, sell or fight, was a constant hum beneath the surface of the quiet. Mr. Gable returned on Friday, as promised. He brought with him a briefcase full of papers that represented the tangled mess my grandfather had left behind. We sat at the kitchen table, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor. He laid out the documents one by one. Bank statements, loan agreements, tax notices. The numbers were staggering. The medical debt alone was close to $100,000. The ranch was mortgaged to the hilt. Elias was land-rich and cash-poor, Mr. Gable explained, his expression sympathetic. He loved this place more than anything, but sentiment doesn't pay the bills. He sold off small parcels over the years to stay afloat, but the cancer, it took everything he had left. Then he pulled out another folder, this one glossy and professional. The logo on the front read, Horizon Development Group. "This is their latest offer," he said, sliding a letter across the table. I picked it up. The number printed in bold at the bottom of the page made me gasp. $2 million. After paying off the debts and taxes, I would walk away with over $1.5 million. I thought about what that money could do. I could go anywhere, be anyone. I could get an apartment, go to college, travel the world. I could have a life of security, a life free from the constant worry and instability that had defined my existence. It was everything I had ever dreamed of. A clean slate, just as my mother had wanted for me. "It's a very generous offer, Leo," Mr. Gable said quietly. "They want the water rights from Vance Creek. They're planning a luxury golf resort and housing development in the next valley over. This ranch is the key to the whole project." "What happens to the ranch if I sell?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "They'll tear down the house and the barn, dam the creek. The valley will be flooded to create a reservoir. The land will be gone." Gone. The word hung in the air between us. The house where my mother grew up, the land my grandfather killed a man to protect, the soil where that same man was buried. All of it erased, swallowed by an artificial lake for a golf course. The idea made me feel sick. "You don't have to decide today," Mr. Gable said, sensing my turmoil. "But they won't wait forever, and the bank won't either. The next mortgage payment is due in 30 days. If you can't make it, the bank will foreclose, and you'll lose everything anyway. The developers know that. They're just waiting." He was right. I was on a clock. I had 30 days to decide the fate of my past and my future. That night, I couldn't sleep. I took a flashlight and my grandfather's letter and walked out of the house. The night sky was a revelation. Free from the city's light pollution, The stars were a brilliant, glittering canopy. The Milky Way was a luminous slash across the darkness. I'd never seen anything like it. It was beautiful and terrifying, a reminder of how small I was. I walked toward the North Ridge, where the pines grew thickest. My grandfather's words echoed in my head. We buried him out on the North Ridge. I didn't know if I wanted to find the spot, or if I was just drawn to the place where the story turned darkest. The beam of my flashlight cut a nervous path through the trees. The air grew colder under the dense canopy of pine. It was a somber, silent place. I wasn't looking for a marker, but I found one, a small, unnatural clearing. The ground was slightly sunken and covered in a thick mat of pine needles, but it was clear that nothing had grown there for a very long time. This was it, the grave of my father. A man I never knew, a man whose violence had shaped my entire life from a distance. I stood at the edge of the clearing, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand. I felt no grief, no anger, only a profound and hollow sadness. He was a monster, but he was also a part of my story. His darkness was woven into my DNA, and then I saw it. Tucked into the hollow of a large, lightning-scarred pine at the edge of the clearing was a metal box. It was an old army ammunition can, painted black and rusted at the edges. It was almost completely hidden by overgrown brush. My heart leaped into my throat. This wasn't an accident. This was left here to be found. It took me a few minutes to pry the rusted latches open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth to protect them from the damp, was another bundle of letters, a small tarnished silver locket, and a thick wad of cash. $100 bills bound with a rubber band. I didn't count it, but it looked like thousands. I opened the locket first. On one side was a tiny, faded picture of my mother. On the other, a picture of a baby, me. My breath hitched. She had kept a picture of me. I had not been forgotten. Then I unfolded the letters. The handwriting was different. It was a graceful, flowing script. My mother's. There were dozens of them, all addressed to me. To my son, Leo. I sank to the ground, my back against the rough bark of the pine tree, and in the narrow beam of my flashlight surrounded by the ghosts of the past, I began to read the story of my life, in the words of the woman who gave it to me. Listen, if you've made it this far into my story, thank you. It's not an easy one to tell, and I'm guessing it's not an easy one to hear. Maybe you've had a moment like this in your own life, a moment where you found a box, or a letter, or a secret that changed everything you thought you knew about yourself. A moment where the past reached out and demanded you make a choice. It's a heavy thing to stand at a crossroads like that. If you've ever felt that weight, I want you to know you're not alone. This community we're building here is for people who get it. Let me know in the comments if a part of this is hitting home for you. Your stories matter too. Now, let's get back to that night on the ridge, because what I read in those letters changed not just my past, but the entire course of my future. The first letter was dated a week after she left me at St. Jude's. Her words were raw, stained with tears that had blurred the ink in places. "My darling Leo," she wrote, "today I did the hardest thing I will ever do. I walked away from you. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn back, to snatch you up and run. But I couldn't. The world is not safe for us together. That man's shadow is long, and his friends are not the forgiving type. They will look for him, and they will look for me. The only way to save you from that life is to cut you free from mine. They told me you will be adopted, that you will have a mother and a father who can give you a safe, normal life. I pray every night that they are right. I pray you never have to know the fear that I live with. Forgetting me is the greatest gift I can give you. Please, my son, forget me and be happy. But I hadn't been adopted. I had languished in the system, a forgotten file in a cabinet. Her sacrifice in some ways had been for nothing. I felt a surge of anger at the faceless system that had failed us both. I read on, letter after letter. She wrote to me every year on my birthday. She described the places she was, the jobs she worked. Waitress, fruit picker, motel cleaner. She was a ghost, drifting through the country, never putting down roots. She wrote about her loneliness, her constant fear. But mostly, she wrote about me. She imagined what I looked like, what my voice sounded like, what my favorite color was. She told me stories about her own childhood on the ranch, riding horses with my grandfather, swimming in the creek in the summer. She painted a picture of a life that should have been mine. She was keeping me alive in her heart, creating a relationship on paper that she could never have in reality. The last few letters were different. Her tone shifted. The fear was still there, but it was mixed with something else. Resolve. Leo, one of the later letters began, I have been running for over a decade, and I am tired, so tired. I realize now that I didn't just cut you free from my past. I cut you off from your roots, from your history. I stole your home from you. My father writes to me. He tells me he is getting older, that the ranch is becoming too much for him. He tells me a company is trying to buy the land. The thought of that place being paved over, of our history being erased, I can't bear it. That land is all we have left. It's the only proof we ever existed. And then, the final letter. The paper was crisp, the ink fresh. It was dated only 6 months ago. My dearest son, I have made a decision. I am tired of running. I am coming home. Not to the ranch, it's still not safe. But I'm coming back to fight. That development company, Horizon, they are not what they seem. I've been doing some research. They are a subsidiary of a much larger corporation, one with deep connections to your father's old associates. It's not a coincidence that they want our land, Leo. They are not just after the water. They are trying to erase the last piece of us. They are trying to bury a secret for good. I don't know what they think they'll find, or what they're trying to hide, but I know it's connected to that night. I am going to find a way to stop them. I have saved some money. It's in this box. It's not much, but maybe it's a start. I'm working with an investigative journalist. We are close to finding something, a connection that will expose them. If something happens to me, if you ever find this, do not trust them. Do not sell. The money they offer is blood money. Fight for our home, Leo. It's the only thing that's real. All my love forever. Your mother, Ilara. I sat there in the dark woods, the letters scattered around me, my world completely shattered and rebuilt in the span of a few hours. My mother wasn't dead. She was alive. She was out there somewhere, fighting for me, for us, and she was in danger. The offer from Horizon wasn't a lucky windfall. It was a threat. They weren't trying to buy the land, they were trying to bury it and my family's story along with it. The choice my grandfather had given me was no longer a choice. Selling was not an option. It was surrender. It was letting them win, letting them erase my mother, my grandfather, and the truth. I finally understood what my grandfather meant when he wrote that he trusted me with the land. He wasn't just trusting me to be a good rancher. He was trusting me to be a guardian of their memory, a protector of their legacy. I carefully packed the letters and the money back into the ammo can. I held the locket in my hand, the cool metal a comfort against my skin. I walked back to the house, the beam of my flashlight steady now. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. I was an 18-year-old kid with no resources, no experience, going up against a powerful, dangerous corporation. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't fighting for survival. I was fighting for something more. I was fighting for home. I was fighting for my mother. The next morning, I called Mr. Gable. "I've made a decision," I told him, my voice clear and firm. "I'm not selling." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Leo," he said, his voice heavy with caution, "I advise you to think this through. The bank—" "I'll find a way to pay the bank," I interrupted. "There's some money my grandfather left for me. It's enough for the next few payments. It'll buy me some time." I couldn't tell him about the box. Not yet. It was my mother's secret, and now it was mine. "And what's your plan after that?" he asked, the skepticism evident in his voice. "I'm going to learn how to run this ranch," I said, the words sounding bolder than I felt. "And I'm going to find out why Horizon Development is so desperate to get their hands on it." Mr. Gable sighed. "Leo, these are not people you want to provoke. They play hardball." "I don't have a choice," I said. "This is my home." I could almost hear him shake his head through the phone, but his tone softened. "All right, son, it's your decision. I work for you. I'll inform their lawyers that the offer is rejected, but you be careful. Call me if you need anything at all." After I hung up, a strange sense of calm settled over me. I had a purpose. The first step was the most obvious. I had to learn what it meant to be a rancher. I started with my grandfather's books, devouring them late into the night. But books could only teach me so much. I needed a teacher. My grandfather's journal mentioned a neighbor, a man named Cal Riley, who had helped him out during the last years of his illness. The same man Mr. Gable said was looking after the cattle. I found his ranch on a map a few miles down the valley. The next day, I got into the old beat-up pickup truck my grandfather had left in the barn, thankfully with the keys in the ignition, and after a few sputtering attempts, managed to get it started. I drove over to the Riley place. Cal was in his late 50s, a tall, lean man with a face as weathered as the landscape. He was mending a fence when I pulled up, and he watched me approach with cautious, assessing eyes. "You must be the boy," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He didn't offer to shake my hand. "Leo Vance," I said, extending my own. He looked at my hand for a second before wiping his on his jeans and giving it a firm, quick shake. "Heard you inherited the place," Cal said, turning back to his fence. "Lawyer told me you were thinking of selling to those developer sharks." "I'm not selling," I said. The words felt good to say out loud. "I'm staying. But I don't know the first thing about ranching. Mr. Gable said you were helping my grandfather. I was hoping you could teach me." Cal stopped his work and looked at me. Really looked at me this time. He squinted, his eyes tracing the lines of my face. "You've got her eyes," he said, his voice suddenly softer. "Her?" "Ilara's," he said. "Your mother. I knew her, grew up with her. She was a firecracker, that one." He paused, a sad smile touching his lips. "Your grandfather was a good man, a stubborn fool, but a good man. He'd be glad you're not letting those vultures take his land." He picked up his tools. "All right, boy, you want to learn? Be at your barn tomorrow at sunrise. We'll start with fixing the fences your granddad let go. And don't be late. The cows won't wait." It was the beginning of the hardest work I had ever done. From sunrise to sunset, 7 days a week, Cal put me to work. I learned to mend fences, to ride a horse, to read the weather in the clouds. I learned the rhythm of the land, the cycle of life and death that governed everything. My body ached in ways I never knew it could. My city-soft hands became calloused and scarred. But with every fence post I dug, with every bale of hay I hauled, I felt myself changing. The land was getting into me, under my skin. I was becoming a part of it. But the other fight, the one against Horizon, was never far from my mind. A week after I told Mr. Gable to reject their offer, a sleek black car came up the driveway. A man in an expensive suit got out. He was smooth and polished, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He introduced himself as Mr. Davies, a representative from Horizon. "Leo," he said, his tone friendly but condescending. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Our offer was more than fair. It's a life-changing amount of money for a young man like yourself." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," I said, standing my ground on the porch. "I'm not interested." His smile tightened. "This land is dying, son. The house is falling apart. The debts are piling up. You can't possibly manage this on your own. We're offering you an easy way out, a smart way out." "I like it here," I said simply. His demeanor shifted. The fake friendliness vanished, replaced by a cold edge. "Don't be a fool. That $2 million offer was a courtesy. We can get this land one way or another. We can buy the debt from the bank. We can make your life very, very difficult. You're just a kid. You have no idea who you're dealing with." He got back in his car and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and a cold feeling of dread in his wake. The threat was real. I knew I couldn't fight them alone. I thought of my mother's last letter, an investigative journalist. She had been working with someone, but who? There was no name, no clue. I spent nights poring over her letters again, searching for any hint I might have missed. Nothing. The pressure mounted. The bank sent a formal notice of impending foreclosure. I used a portion of the cash from the ammo box to make the payment, buying myself another month. But I knew it was a temporary fix. It was like trying to patch a dam with chewing gum. One evening, Cal came by. He'd seen the fancy car. He knew what was happening. We sat on the porch as the sky turned pink. "Your grandfather fought them too," he said, looking out at the valley. "They've been trying to get this land for years. He always said there was something wrong about them, something rotten." "My mother was looking into them," I said, deciding to trust him. "She wrote that she was working with a journalist. She said Horizon was connected to my father's old associates." Cal's face hardened. He knew the story. I realized in that moment that my grandfather hadn't been entirely alone in his secret. "I remember Alara asking questions," he said slowly, "just before she left for good. She was asking about old land deeds, water rights filings from way back. She thought something was hidden in the paperwork. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead I had." The next day, I drove into Prairie Ridge to the county clerk's office. It was a dusty room in the basement of the courthouse, filled with shelves of heavy, leather-bound ledgers. I spent days there, my eyes sore from deciphering faded cursive and complex legal jargon. I started with the original deeds for the Vance Creek Ranch and the surrounding properties. It was tedious, mind-numbing work. And then I found it. It was a discrepancy, a small one, in a water rights transfer from 30 years ago. A parcel of land upstream from our ranch, one that Horizon now owned, had its water rights document amended. The original document granted rights from a seasonal spring. The amendment, filed a month later and signed by a different, now-deceased county official, changed the source to Vance Creek itself. It was a forgery, and a clumsy one at that, but it was the legal basis for their entire development project. Without the water from our creek, their resort was just a patch of dry dirt. But there was more. The name of the notary on the forged document was a man I recognized from my mother's letters. It was a name she mentioned as one of my father's closest, most dangerous friends. This wasn't just a corporate land grab. This was personal. They weren't just trying to get the water. They were trying to solidify a fraudulent claim that was connected to the criminal enterprise my mother had escaped from. Maybe they thought something incriminating was on this land. Maybe they were just finishing what my father had started, taking everything from my family. I had the proof, a piece of it anyway. I made copies of everything and took them to Mr. Gable. He looked at the documents, his eyes widening. "My God," he whispered, This is dynamite, Leo. Forgery, fraud. This is a criminal conspiracy." "Is it enough to stop them?" I asked. He looked at me, a new respect in his eyes. "It's enough to start a war, a legal one. We can file an injunction. We can take this to the state attorney. It's going to be a long, expensive, and ugly fight. They will come after you with everything they have. Let them come," I said. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, protective love for the land, for the family I was just getting to know. "They've been trying to bury my family for 18 years. It's time we started digging." The legal battle was everything Mr. Gable promised. Long, ugly, and expensive. Horizon Development threw a team of high-priced lawyers at us. They filed counter-motions. They buried us in paperwork. They tried to drain my meager resources. The rest of the money my mother had left went to legal fees. I sold off a few of the older, unusable pieces of farm equipment to keep going. Cal and a few other neighboring ranchers who had their own suspicions about Horizon pitched in, offering advice, manpower, and sometimes just a hot meal and a sympathetic ear. For the first time, I felt like part of a community. These quiet, hard-working people saw me not as an outsider, but as one of their own, fighting the same fight they'd all feared was coming. The fight for the ranch became my entire life. When I wasn't working the land with Cal, I was in Mr. Gable's office, preparing for depositions, or in the county library, researching case law. I learned about water rights, corporate law, and the history of land fraud in the West. The boy, who had barely graduated from the state-run high school, was now studying as if his life depended on it. Because it did. Horizon fought dirty. They started a smear campaign in the local paper, painting me as a troubled, delinquent kid trying to extort money from a respectable company. They hired private investigators who dug into my past at St. Jude's, looking for any dirt they could find. They even tried to intimidate my allies. Cal found one of his fences cut, his prize bull mysteriously sick. But it backfired. Their aggression only solidified the community's support for me. They saw it for what it was, a bully trying to crush a kid who was standing up for his home. During a deposition, I came face to face with Mr. Davies again. Across the polished table, he oozed a smug confidence. His lawyers were sharks. They twisted my words, questioned my motives, tried to paint me as unstable. But I held on to the truth. I had my mother's letters, my grandfather's journal, and the forged document. I had my story. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Vance?" Davies asked, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "Why not just take the money? You could have anything you want." I looked him straight in the eye. "Because you can't put a price on this," I said. "You're not just trying to buy land. You're trying to erase a family. You're trying to bury a crime, and I won't let you." His composure cracked for just a second. A flicker of something, fear, anger, crossed his face before the mask was back in place. In that moment, I knew my mother was right. This was about more than water. The turning point came from an unexpected place. Mr. Gable, inspired by my mother's note about a journalist, had started making some quiet inquiries. He found her. A woman named Sarah Jenkins, a freelance reporter who specialized in corporate crime. She had been working with my mother, Ilara, before she'd suddenly gone silent 6 months ago. Sarah flew out to meet us. She was sharp, determined, and had a fire in her eyes that reminded me of how I imagined my mother. She listened to my story, read the letters, and examined the forged deed. "Your mother was brilliant," Sarah said, her voice filled with admiration. "She was on to all of this. She'd found a source inside the company, someone who was ready to talk. But then, she vanished. The source went silent. I thought the trail had gone cold. My mother's disappearance now had a terrifying context. She hadn't just drifted away. She had gotten too close to the truth, and they had made her disappear. The thought was a cold stone in my gut, but it also fueled my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for the land anymore. I was fighting for justice for her. Sarah's involvement changed the game. She published an explosive article detailing Horizon's fraudulent claim, their connection to organized crime, and my family's story. The story got picked up by national news outlets. The state attorney general, facing public pressure, launched a formal investigation. The corporate giant was suddenly on the defensive. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place during the state's investigation. The insider my mother had been cultivating, scared but emboldened by the public scrutiny, came forward. He was a low-level accountant who had been forced to cook the books for years. He provided investigators with a mountain of evidence: internal emails, financial records, and recorded conversations that proved not only the land fraud, but a larger pattern of money laundering and racketeering, all tied back to my father's old associates. The name on the forged deed was a key figure in their criminal network. Their attempt to secure the water rights was an attempt to legitimize a foothold in the valley and wash their dirty money through a massive construction project. The Horizon Development Project imploded. Indictments came down. Mr. Davies and several other executives were arrested. The corporation was buried in lawsuits and federal charges. They withdrew their claim on the water rights, and their interest in the Vance Creek Ranch vanished overnight. We had won. The day the news broke, I was out on the North Ridge, not far from the pine tree where I'd found my mother's letters. Cal drove up in his truck and handed me a newspaper. The headline was splashed across the front page. I read it, and for the first time since I'd arrived in Montana, the tension that had been a constant companion finally released its grip. I sank to my knees, the dry grass crunching beneath me, and I cried. I cried for my grandfather, who had carried his burden alone for so long. I cried for the lost years, and I cried for my mother, a woman I had never known, but whose courage had saved us all. The aftermath was quiet. The lawyers and reporters eventually went away. The valley settled back into its peaceful rhythm. The victory wasn't a windfall. I was still broke, still facing a mountain of debt, but the ranch was mine. Free and clear of the threat that had loomed over it for decades. With the legal cloud gone, Mr. Gable was able to help me restructure the debt with the local bank, which was now far more sympathetic. It would take me years, maybe a lifetime, to pay it off, but it was possible. The ranch could support itself and me. I never found my mother. The investigation into Horizon uncovered evidence that she had been targeted, but her fate remains a mystery. Sarah Jenkins believes she was likely killed to silence her. I have to live with that uncertainty, that open wound. But I no longer think of her as a ghost. I think of her as a guardian. Her love and her courage are in every corner of this ranch. I feel her in the wind that rustles the cottonwoods by the creek, in the warmth of the sun on the fields. She isn't gone, she's home. My life is here now. It's a hard life. It's up before the sun and to bed long after dark. It's the constant worry of weather, sickness, and falling market prices. It's not the easy, comfortable life that $2 million could have bought me. But it's a real life. It's a life with roots, with purpose. When I stand on the porch and look out at the land, I don't just see acres of dirt. I see a story. I see my grandfather's strength, my mother's sacrifice. I see a legacy of love so fierce it was willing to kill, to abandon, and to fight, all in the name of protection. I learned that inheritance isn't about what you're given, it's about what you choose to fight for. Home isn't just a place you live, it's a place you belong to, a place that claims you. I was an orphan who was told he had nothing and no one. But the truth is, I had the most valuable inheritance of all. I had a story worth saving. I had a home worth fighting for. And in the end, that's what saved me. This journey taught me something powerful. It taught me that the stories we're told about ourselves, especially when we're young and vulnerable, are not always the truth. The system might label you an orphan, a delinquent, a lost cause. The world might tell you you're alone. But somewhere out there, there's a history you don't know, a story of sacrifice and love that led to you being right where you are. Your life is not an accident. You are the product of a legacy, even if that legacy is hidden. Maybe you're fighting your own battle right now. Maybe you're facing your own version of horizon development. A debt, an illness, a painful past. A system that's trying to tell you who you are. Maybe you're standing at a crossroads with an easy way out on one side and a hard, meaningful fight on the other. What I want to leave you with is this. Don't let them erase your story. Dig for the truth. Fight for your land, whatever that land may be. A dream, a family, a sense of self. It will be the hardest work you ever do. But your story is worth it. You are worth it. Thank you for letting me share this with you. If this resonated, if you've ever had to fight for who you are, subscribe and become part of this community. And please, share a piece of your own story in the comments. Tell me about a time you chose the harder right over the easier wrong. I read every one, because in sharing our stories we realized we were never really alone at all.